Hi, I'm Dan Winter. This is a video to go along with the new article goldenmean.info/Carrington event. The title of this presentation is The 2012 Story Based on a Profound Understanding of Plasma Science of the Plasma Universe and Implosive Compression. So, accompanying this article, you see here we have the reprint from the Seattle Examiner on 2012 May Bring the Perfect Storm. And the very sobering discussion is showing that all of the kind of New Age woo-woo conversation about 2012 is not entirely without scientific merit. Specifically, the prediction that there will be what's called a Carrington event is now highly probable. Others of our scientists, including Peter Taylor, author of goldenmean.info/fractality, not carbon, he is another of the former UN scientists who says even this year, May to October, very high probability of EMF pulse type Carrington event solar wind maximum. Remember, this Carrington event phenomenon, you have the three heaviest planets that shape the magnetopause of the solar system that functions as a lens that determines in what direction the solar max wind comes and basically whether we get toasted. There is precedent for the Carrington event. It is highly probable, as NASA is announcing, that these kinds of events may toast even a majority or certainly a large number of the major power company transformers, among other things, on the planet. And countries which are hit more directly may, in fact, as NASA themselves announce, even never recover. It's important to know that if you get a significant percentage of your power transformers knocked in your power grid, because we don't even have the equipment to replace them, if not for months or years, that there could be major bioregions that are without power for at least months or years with the ensuing chaos. It is strongly recommended that in a practical way, as you prepare for the next 2 years or year and a half, that it's very useful to look around and think, what would you do if in your area you were without power for many months? And just make practical plans, water, seeds, food, that sort of thing. It's simply practical, as well as the usual high wind, high water. And indeed, we have this phenomena of the alignment of what Paul Laviolette calls the galactic superwave, which contributes to this compression event. And we're going to be talking about how it is that that compression can be prepared for in a meaningful way. Here, Paul Laviolette, author of the Galactic Superwave and Other Materials, is describing how the great tsunami of the Indian Ocean, Boxing Day, was within hours of the arrival of the largest gamma ray burst in recent history, and discussed the physics of the correlation, another example of that compression event. Paul Laviolette also talks about the galactic superwave theory and many physics predictions that came from the galactic superwave story in his book Earth Under Fire and elsewhere, his website etheric.com. Short summary that the equatorial alignment of the galactic equator, the solar equator, and the Earth equator, that when those equators line up, and here we have an animation for that, that when those three equators line up, you have a phenomena that increases the compression on the magnetism of the solar system and also brings a dust cloud which increases the internal heat. This animation here is from Nick Fiorenza, Erection of the Holy Cross. This animation is another animation that shows how the three perpendicular, the three planes of the galactic Earth and solar equator, as they nutate and precess toward closer to a 90-degree relationship with the 2012 event called the Erection of the Holy Cross. So indeed, this galactic alignment, it helps us understand, be introduced to the plasma theory of the universe. And I suggest you look at some of the many websites on plasma universe theory. Essentially what we're saying here is that in physics, the universe is 99.99% plasma. Plasma is a cloud of charge. And if it is fractal or phase conjugate at center, there's a centripetal force holding that together. It's actually a cloud of charge, charge being the plus minus rarefaction compression of the ether. And when that cloud of charge has a centripetal force, namely fractal or phase conjugate at the center, it makes a plasma cloud, which is basically the physics of creation itself, namely that, for example, mass is compressed charge rotating. So this plasma universe theory is a good way to begin to understand the dynamics of the upcoming solar maxima kinds of event. It helps us to understand, for example, why the the dolmen were placed at tetrahedral latitudes, Cydonia and Giza, because you modulate the spin rates of planets to phase lock them with zodiacal spin better, more fractal, more self-embedded, and that will then create the centripetal force which stabilizes atmosphere, which in a way is a vindication of Kepler, as you know, that he was essentially right when he said the planetary orbits are the nesting of the Platonic solids. What he really meant was that that nesting of the Platonic solids, that is the planetary orbits, based on golden ratio, is effectively the cause of stable gravity and therefore stable atmosphere, as confirmed by spirosolaris.ca, who says the exponential order, the constant of linearity for the resulting planetary framework, the new math of the geometry of the solar system, is in fact golden ratio, because that is in fact how you make and stabilize gravity and therefore atmosphere. And we talked about the history of the galaxy, that the galaxy's pain, just like a human being's pain, is where fractality bleeds charge. So we saw that old picture of the galactic core where our particular spiral arm, the Orion arm, is torn and bleeding, and we know the story of that, the history of the Orion Wars kinds of stories. We compared that to this Star Navigator's map of the galaxy from Voynich manuscript, and also Sealing at Dendera. Let's see if we can find that image here. Here it is. On the right, you have a relatively accurate map of our galaxy. On the left, you have the picture from the famous Voynich manuscript. Rather impressive evidence that somebody was shamanically capable of navigating their aura to the point of view of being able to see the geometry of our galaxy before there were telescopes and radio astronomy to know what that map is. So your plasma can go there if you, as it were, get your show together. And in plasma universe theory, we talk about this, that the double cones of the massive geometry of, for example, Orion, are a good indication of how gravity is made, that those double cones, when they approach and converge, kiss in the nose like two pine cones, which is the physics of phase conjugation, which is the only known example of self-organization in optics, and now we know phase conjugate dielectrics are bioactive and create life, and I have invented phase conjugate magnetics, where like poles attract. And here we have the early picture of Orion in the Japanese woodcut. Notice the two double cones, and that became the symbol for Orion here, the Antarian conversion, the so-called Yod, He, Vah-He, two opposing light cones. If you pronounce indeed Yahweh and a spectrum analyzer, you make two opposing cones. Introduction to Phase Conjugation 101. We have our famous animation of the fact that the heart of Orion is pregnant with star birth and needs the investment of what would be called consciousness, or a phase conjugate dielectric, that in fact our collective plasma as a gene pool can stabilize the birth of stars if we really understand what we're for, beginning with understanding how your plasma can go into the sun. And so this became the universal symbol for Orion. You see the two opposing cones, Antarian conversion. So we want to just understand this science a little bit more in terms of the plasma dynamics. The Hopi's name for that great cone was called Pesh May-10, the way of, or 1 less than 10, the way of the 9, and you see the double cones there. And that way of the 9 we now are going to see is the plasma physics of why a plasma storm self-organizes into 9 donuts, why you have 9 chakras, and Deep Space Nine, and 9 steps of Palenque, and Inferno, and Egyptian Ennead, etc., etc., and the 9 tetrahedron of the Sri Yantra, which is about to talk about that. If we understand this in plasma terms, we can understand how indeed we survived plasma compression, the solar wind, the 2012 event. Here we have some beautiful images of that from John Fanuzzi, showing us in an artistic way how to image how this compression works in the cone of the fractal based on golden ratio, and how that actually creates self-embedding, and we're going to see creates the geometry in which charge compression can be charge acceleration. We thank John Fanuzzi for these wonderful images. So now we're going to take a pause and move to part 2 of this presentation, the Whale Dreamer Plasma Storm.